there, it's Chris from Avid Intent, and this fun short video I'm going to walk through just comparing some big and small ticket items, comparing Bitcoin, of course, and the US dollar over time, and just seeing how those things trend. One of the things I've noticed is people get really confused with Bitcoin and how do I translate to how much that I pay in my native currency if you're a US dollar person or euro or yen or whatever that is for you. We have this frame of reference that we're always trying to compare it to, right? And so we'll walk through that and give you some nice comparison over time to help that out. Now, years ago, and maybe many of you are like this, I traveled quite a bit internationally, and I would see something in the native currency price, a Singapore dollar, Australian dollar, a New Zealand dollar, Canadian dollar, the pound, francs, right? What have you. This is before euro. And I would always just translate in my native currency, like how much is this, right? I was trying to orient, like, am I buying a $50 thing, a $500 thing, or a 5-cent thing? If any of you travel internationally, you kind of know how that is. And there's better tools now, and you've got phones and everything, but it's still a little bit confusing. We're looking for that frame of reference from something we know, right? And all the currencies look different and are different shapes and all of that. And their numbers talking about translations, compared to what. So we're always just trying to orient ourselves from our base currency, whatever that is. So it makes sense that a hard money like Bitcoin that has a different exchange rate can be confusing. How much is this? What's the value of this thing? So that's why I put this video together and also show some trends over time. So let's compare some big and small ticket items. These are the things that most people talk about during political rallies or newscasts or everything else. They certainly make the headlines. So eggs is one that's come into the audiences today more and more. People talk about the price of eggs. Oh my gosh, it's $12 or $3 or $5, whatever that is. Vehicles is almost something we always talk about, right? The average price of a vehicle used to be something sub 20,000. It's certainly a lot larger than that today. Homes is something, and housing is talked about a lot, right? We have our transportation in our homes, and then gas prices, right? I know at least my parents' generation, that's a big thing talked about. The weather and gas prices are talked about an awful lot, but people talk about that a lot and sometimes attribute it to whoever's the president at the time, which is an interesting thing because it has a lot less to do with that than people think, but I digress. These are the four things we're going to walk through and just give you an orientation of Bitcoin versus US dollar over a little bit of time and see how that trends. Now, the eggs thing actually comes from all places the St. Louis Federal Reserve. Whoever is doing this at the Federal Reserve, it's a surprise that they're actually doing this and sharing it, but it comes from them, the folks that really set the value of our currency along with the U.S. Treasury. So in U.S. dollar terms, from 2009 to today, I'm late in the year in 2023 when I'm recording this. This is, of course, according to the U.S. Bureau of Labor Statistics and the Federal Reserve. And here's the price of eggs. Now, it peaked up quite a bit earlier this year in the $5-ish range. I'm sure you'll find some organic eggs at Whole Foods that are worth double that, but this is probably the general run-of-the-mill dozen eggs. And you can see over time, from 2009 to 2023, it's really stayed in that sort of $2 range. So when it got to $5, that's a big change, right? And it feels very, very expensive. And when we're really tight in our budget, that can feel very impactful, right? I want to compare that in the price of Bitcoin. Now, most of you probably don't use Bitcoin for your everyday pricing, but this is also from the Federal Reserve, right? Comparing what Bitcoin was. In this case, it started about 2015 when the data was available, trending down currently. Now, no data is perfect. I want you to look at the shape of the curve and the trends here. Now, US dollar, it's kind of even and slowly trending up, maybe coming back down, and Bitcoin is going down and flat. And that has to do with some of the specifics of how Bitcoin works. It is a scarce asset where the US dollar isn't. Don't worry about that right now. Let's go into the next couple comparisons. So vehicles, we used a bunch of sources here to get the best data I could. Is the data perfect? No. Is it suspect? No. It's accurate directionally for sure. So what I did is take comparing the US car price in the US dollars versus Bitcoin. Orange is Bitcoin, blue is the US dollar. And you can see the car price has gone from just a little bit under 17,000 or so, average car price in 2014. We're now approaching $50,000 as the average car price. At the same time, if you look at that shape, from a Bitcoin perspective, as the scarcity remains the same, and there's less available, and there's more demand, the value or the price in Bitcoin goes down. Similar to what we saw in the last chart, maybe a little bit more dramatic. And there's two axes here. On the left, you have US dollar. and the right you have Bitcoin. Here are the hard numbers for those that like to look at spreadsheets instead of graphs. We had around a $16,000 average car price. 2014, now it's $48,000. We'll talk about inflation and those effects here briefly. But look at the dramatic change from a Bitcoin perspective. You're at 45 Bitcoin and now you're at 2 and continuing to trend down and flat out. So that's the vehicle comparison. Let's hop into something that's really the big ticket item, which is housing. If you're someone that's buying a house, and there's so many factors here: interest rates, availability, different parts of the world and country have different prices for homes, right? If you're on the beach in Southern California, you're going to be looking at a tens of millions dollar number. If you're inland in the Midwest, maybe in a non-popular area, that could be under 250K. So we're using averages here. The data is not perfect, but directionally it's very useful. We use Statista and Yahoo Finance for this. And we took a relatively small sample size just because the data varies so much. So from 2017 to late 2023, if you look at the price of a house, went from around $381,000 to $500,000 average house price. Just amazing, even with the high interest rates. And if you look from a Bitcoin perspective, we've gone from almost 37 Bitcoin down to 23 for that average house price. Now, it's a smaller data set, but again, look at the shape of the curve. The US dollar one's going to continue to go up. That has to do with a variety of things. Namely, we're continually creating more US dollars through activities from the Federal Reserve, from the US Treasury, sometimes government intervention, but those first two are often overlooked. So the Federal Reserve, made up of 12 banks, and what do banks want to do? They want to keep us in debt. That is their product and service. They're the ones setting the value of the currency and the exchange rates along with the Treasury. So an entity that wants to keep people in debt, because that is their product and service, they're going to act a certain way. And one of the ways they act is to continually create more currency. So that's why you see the prices go up, because the value of the US dollar is going down. There's more currency available. There's more, pebbles or beans or rice or whatever you want to call it, just magically available. So the value of that goes down. The value of Bitcoin is always going up because it is a scarce asset with only 21 million ever in existence. Now, those 21 million are divisible by a million. There'll be plenty of Bitcoin to go around. We don't need to freak out about it. But because it's a hard asset, it's something we're not used to. It's actually a deflationary asset, which means prices actually go down instead of going up. We don't have to have inflation as just something we expect. In fact, that really happened in 1971 when the US dollar went off the gold standard and inflation just began to shoot through the roof as we're just magically printing money based on pretty much nothing. Okay. Now for that sermon, let's compare gas. And this is from the U.S. Energy Information Administration. So we're comparing gas from 2014 till 2023. Something that makes the headlines a lot. Oh my gosh, Biden's in office, gas prices are high. Trump's in office, gas prices are low. You pick your politician and high or low on the other end. It's a common headline. It's a common campaign thing. And really, those politicians have less to do with this very complex pricing scheme than anyone. But it's a common scheme and it's easy to blame folks. I get it. Again, same sort of pattern here, right? The price for gas has gone up considerably. I apologize, the axes aren't here. I'll have a link below to my blog that's got all the details so you can see it for my friends that love details. And the price from a Bitcoin perspective has gone down. So in 2014, the average price was around $292. And again, this varies across the country and where you live and time of year, but a rough average is $292. In 2023, on average, it's gone as high as $5.52. In parts of California, it's $7 a gallon at times. That price from a Bitcoin perspective has gone down, and has gone down considerably. Even with OPEC manipulating gas prices and all the other things at play, you see this same pattern with gas that you've seen in home prices, that we've walked through on eggs, that we've walked through in vehicles. The same pattern. So what is this big trend, right? The purchasing power of US dollar is declining because the supply is increasing. As I mentioned, we're continually creating more US dollars, so their value is less. Now, we call it inflation, and that sounds good. Getting bigger always sounds good. Really, it's devaluation of our currency. So if you look from 1959 and go down to 2023 on the right, and this is from Statista and US Bureau of Labor Statistics, you see a considerable drop. Around 1971 or so, that's when we went off the gold standard, and you see the shape of that curve dive, and then maybe level out in a dive. But the purchasing power of a US dollar year on year is declining. You can call it devaluation if you want to instead of inflation. And there's an inflation calculator on the U.S. Bureau of Labor Statistics you can go to. I'll put a link below. $1,000 in 1969 has the same buying power as $8,000, $8,645, which means it's gone down 8.6 times over that a little bit over 50-year time period. I mean, that's really significant if you think about it. If you've got a investment that's based in US dollar, which most of them are, stocks, bonds, what's in your 401k and everything else, the underlying asset there is a US dollar and it's devaluing, right? So at some point, you've got to realize that you're playing the same game even though you think you're diversifying with your investments, and it's all devaluing over time. So, what to do. I don't mean to be doomsday here. This is just laying out some facts in as clear a way as I know how. There's a couple things to do here. One is realize the pattern that's happening. And once you see it, you can't really unsee it. You could pretend it's going to go away and everything's going to be okay. And that generally, hope and pretending are not a great strategy for life, but that's absolutely an option. But realize that there's a pattern here. As we increase the volume of US dollars, which we're continuing doing every year, the value is going down, which means prices are going to go up because the value of it is less. And that'll just keep continuing and continuing. Generally, our rates of pay, our cost of living does not keep up with that. So that'll get stretched and stretched and stretched and stretched as we go. One thing to think about is truly diversify. I love Legos. I'm not trying to pick on Legos here at all, but really, if you've got stocks, bonds, other sort of investments that are US dollar based, that's not truly diversifying, because underlying it, you still have that asset that is suspect to all of this, right? It's influenced by all of it. So you're still playing with Legos. The thing you could consider doing is playing with things other than Legos, right? So hard assets like Bitcoin, like real estate, like gold, that would be a diversity play. Things that are not based on the US dollar or the euro or the yen. I've picked a lot on the US dollar. Most global currencies by most countries are what are called fiat based, and they have this same problem where a government entity or a corporation or a group of banks can influence the currency directly. And over time, we've seen that again and again. That leads to two major issues. So if you can't tell, I'm a very, very much a fan of appropriate use of Bitcoin, and I believe strongly in its generational wealth capabilities, because over 50 years, it's not going to devalue, like we've clearly seen the US dollar do. And even in the short term, we've seen the US dollar do. So strongly recommend that you buy Bitcoin. Take self-custody of that. Do not leave it on the exchange, even if they seem super honest. And that's a little bit of work, but you can do it. And hold it. Right? Now, you can use it to spend. It's your money. Do whatever you want to. And this is not financial advice. It's just information. But I can tell you that buying Bitcoin, taking self-custody, and holding it is a very powerful position to be in. It's not based on the US dollar. You have direct control of it. It's used anywhere in the world. And it'll stand the test of time. So hope you enjoyed this comparison. Hope it maybe opened your eyes a little bit. Welcome your comments and ideas either on the comments below. I'll leave a link to my blog, and you can put comments there as well. Thanks so much. Enjoy. Have a great rest of your day.